Welcome to Evo India and welcome to our review of the facelifted Maruti Suzuki Baleno. SUVs may be all the rage right now, but hatchbacks are still incredibly popular, making a huge chunk of the Indian market. In the hatchbacks, the premium hatchback segment actually makes the most numbers, and within that, the Maruti Suzuki Baleno is the best seller. So this is an incredibly popular car. For 2022, it gets a number of updates. You've got differentiated styling, you've got more features, you've got updated interiors, you've also got a new transmission option with the AMT. What is this car like to drive? What's new about it? Let's dig a little deeper and find out. Before we get to the driving, let's talk about the exterior styling first. On the face of it, it's a typical facelift, which means you've got a redesigned grille, you've got redesigned headlamps and a new bumper. Now these headlamps are interesting. You've got LED projector lamps and you also got this new DRL signature. And this is something that Maruti says we'll be seeing on a lot of other models in the future. They're going to be putting this across model lines to make them identifiable as Marutis. Otherwise, the face of it looks nice, it's fresh for 2022, it's nothing radical, but it is a nice change. On the side though, not too much has changed. The only real difference is to the wheels. You've got these 16-inch alloy wheels over here. They're a new design, but that said, the rest of the Baleno from the side looks pretty much like the older car. When you move over to the rear, that's where you see the other difference on the Baleno's exteriors. You've got this new tail lamp design. Again, the idea here has been to make the car look wider, just like in the front. So you've got wider lamps, they're squatter, and it gives the Baleno a very interesting stance. What do you think of the way the Baleno looks? Let us know in the comments below. Okay, let's talk about the interiors because there are a number of changes to the interiors of the Baleno. The first one that you will notice is this new steering wheel. This steering wheel is straight out of the Swift and I think it fits really nicely into the Baleno's layout. Behind that, you've got your analog dials, you've got a tachometer, you've got a speedometer, and you've got an MID in the middle. What's interesting about the Baleno, one of the big talking points on the interiors is that's a head-up display, and that's new for 2022. Now this is a typical head-up display which rises out of the dash. You've got this plastic panel which is transparent that rises out of the dash, and you see a projection onto it. In terms of what information it throws up at you, it has a time, but in addition to the time, you can see the speed, you can see your tachometer, or you can see your fuel efficiency readout. You can pick between one of these three pieces of information to see up there, and it's pretty well executed, honestly. You can adjust the position of the projection, you can adjust the brightness. So yeah, it's a nicely done unit from Maruti Suzuki. The question is, do you really need a head-up display in a car? Well, honestly, you have the added advantage of not taking your eyes off the road for information like your speed or your fuel efficiency, which is great. But more than that, I think it's more a novelty. I think people buying cars in this segment want cool features. That's what Maruti is trying to appeal to with the head-up display. Now, let's talk about the center console. This is a 9-inch infotainment screen, new for 2022, but it's not just the screen that's new, you've also got a new UX on the inside. So these widgets now are completely customizable. We've never seen it in a Maruti before, but you can move them around the screen and customize it the way you want. In addition to this, you already have your Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, your connected car features, all of that business. You even have voice commands on this Maruti Suzuki now, and they can do a bunch of things around the cabin. What's interesting for 2022 is the addition of a 360-degree camera. If you press this button here, and you can see that it throws up a 360-degree camera. Again, the question here is, do you really need one for a car that has such a small footprint? And I think the answer is the same. I think Maruti is trying to appeal to a buyer who wants cool tech in his car, who wants features that have only been seen in more expensive, more premium cars. And in that sense, it does the job, you know, it works as a 360-degree camera. You can tell what's happening around the car. It's not as seamless as some of the other camera systems out there, but it does the job. Now below that, you've got your AC controls, you've got your cup holders, you've got a USB slot. No USB Type-Cs yet in the Baleno. That's something that's worth noting. And otherwise, the rest of the cabin remains pretty much the same. You've got this dual-tone blue and black theme running around on the cabin, and the whole cabin feels very well executed. I really like this cabin compared to the older Baleno. Now when you talk about the back seat of the Baleno, you actually have a reasonable amount of room. You've got good amounts of knee room, you've got a decent amount of headroom. So this is a spacious place for passengers. However, I do have a few complaints. A, you don't get an armrest in the back seat. You also don't get a headrest for center passengers, and you only get a lap belt for center passengers. That aside, it's a decent place to be. You get air vents over here for the rear passengers, and you can control the airflow. However, these don't feel very high quality, and they're actually the only letdown in terms of quality throughout the entire cabin. Below that, you've got two USB chargers. One is a USB-A, one is a USB Type-C, and this makes it a functional back seat. You can actually sit here for long distances as an adult with no complaints. Okay, so let's settle in behind the wheel of the Baleno and see what's new on this car. For starters, the engine is updated. You've got the same 1.2 K series petrol engine, but it's been updated. You get more power now. The frictional losses from the engine have been reduced. It makes 88 bhp and 113 Nm of torque, and you also get a new stop-start system. What is this engine like to drive? Honestly, it's a really sweet motor. This engine has always been very nice to drive. It's a typical naturally aspirated engine. The power delivery is very linear, it's very smooth, it's a 4-cylinder, it's very refined, and it's a very easy engine to drive. In terms of the way it makes its power, a lot of it is concentrated in the mid to top end. That's typical of these naturally aspirated engine. It doesn't have a turbocharger, so it doesn't suddenly pick up at 1700 RPM or 2000 RPM and fire away to the red line. It's more linear, it's more gradual, but also very satisfying. It's a motor that likes to rev, and it's a motor that you will enjoy revving out. So if you downshift and pick up the pace, it sounds nice and it gets a move on. It's a very nice engine to ring out. It's a typical Maruti engine. It's refined, it's smooth, it's quick, it does all of those things, and it's very easy to drive. The manual gearbox shifts are very light, the clutch is very light, so driving it in the city will never be a problem. It's really easy to get a hang of and get used to. Now, the big change on the Baleno for 2022 is the fact that it does not get a CVT anymore, but instead you get an AMT. And that will seem like a downgrade because, I mean, CVT technology is a little better than AMT technology. AMTs have in the past felt very crude, very basic, and it's not something you'd expect in a premium hatchback like the Baleno. But Maruti's gone and done it. I drove the automatic earlier, not this car, another car, and I must say, I came away pretty impressed. The AMT system has constantly been refined by Maruti, and every time we drive it, it seems to get better. When we drove it in the new Alto, it felt much nicer, and now you're driving it in the Baleno, it feels really good as well. The way that it works is very interesting. When you need acceleration, you get on the gas, it'll actually blip the throttle and give you a downshift, and that makes it very smooth and very quick. The downshifts have been very well calibrated. The upshifts, it's still got a little bit of that head toss effect, so it's not completely free of that, but it's much better than before. The AMT in the Baleno is genuinely an improvement over previous AMTs that we've seen, and that makes it so much nicer to drive. It's been calibrated to deal with low speeds, with city speeds well. So when you're driving it easy, not pushing it too hard, it actually does a good job of dealing with our roads, of dealing with our traffic conditions, and of giving you the driving experience that you'd expect of an automatic. It's not as crude as they used to be. The AMTs used to be so crude. You used to wait for hours to get a shift. You had to deal with terrible head toss. But all of that has been sorted out, ironed out with these new AMTs, and it's actually quite impressive. It's not a proper automatic. It doesn't have the same refinement as a torque converter would. It never will. That's just the nature of the technology. But apart from that, as an AMT, it's a very well executed AMT. With the AMT, you can also take manual control when you want to. You pull back for an upshift, you push forward for a downshift, and it feels nice and sporty. The gearbox does take a little bit of time to respond to you in manual mode, but it's pretty well executed, and like I said, it does the job. What about the rest of the Baleno? Another thing that they've really improved is the ride. The earlier Baleno felt very crashy over bumps. You could really hear the suspension through the chassis. You could really hear it when it went over bumps that were harsh. But now it's much better isolated. There are a few bumps on this road that are really bad, a few rumbler strips, and most cars get rattled silly with them, but the Baleno has been dealing with them incredibly well. You can just glide over them, you don't have to slow down too much, it absorbs everything. Check this out. It absorbs everything so well. You don't have to take it easy in the Baleno anymore. That crashiness, that suspension noise has all been dealt with. It's a much more refined driving experience than before. It's a much more polished driving experience. Driving over Indian roads is always going to be mind-numbing because of how bad the roads are, but the Baleno actually does a very good job of dealing with it. The ride quality is good. The low-speed ride in particular is very impressive. The way it filters out these smaller bumps in the road, the smaller granular bumps, it's really, really effective. And that's not to say it's floaty. You know, you pick up speed. I'm doing 80 kilometers an hour right now, and it's completely flat. It's following the contour of the road. The road is a little bumpy, so there is a slight amount of vertical movement in the car, but apart from that, it's really, really impressive. The handling too. Earlier, the Baleno used to not have that proper self-centering of the steering wheel. It now does. You know, the handling feels very nice. It feels direct, it feels planted, it feels closer to the Swift than it ever has before. Earlier, the Baleno didn't feel as dynamically competent as the Swift, but now with these improvements to the chassis, with the improvements to the steering, it's all coming together much better, making the Baleno a genuine car that you can enjoy driving. And then of course the Baleno gets these features like the head-up display. So you get that up there, and it makes the driving experience a little more differentiated, I would say, from other cars in this segment, because nothing else really gets an HUD in this segment. And the sort of information it throws up is relevant information. It's telling you your speed, it's telling you your tachometer, so you can see where the red line is, you can see what revs you're at. You can throw up your fuel economy on there, and that's great. With the way fuel prices are these days, that's something you always want to keep in mind. So the head-up display is actually a well-executed unit. You know, it's not in your face. You can stow it away if you want to. If you don't want to look at it when you're driving, you can just hold the HUD button over here and it will store the HUD away. But even if it's up, it's not distracting in any way. The colors are simple, the graphics are simple, it isn't overloaded with information, and you can drive along like you would on a regular day without getting bothered by it. Overall, this Baleno feels like a little more than a facelift. Usually a facelift just implies that the styling has been changed and nothing else, nothing about the driving experience would have improved. But with this, things have improved. So you've got more power, you've got a completely different gearbox, and despite the fact that it's not exactly the kind of gearbox you would expect in this segment, it does a good job of being an automatic. So you do have more power, you've got a new gearbox, you've got a chassis that feels a little more polished than before, and you've got additional features and frills and all of that stuff. So yes, the Baleno is much improved. It does feel like half a step up on the older Baleno, and that's a very welcome thing for 2022. This is not just a sticker job. Maruti has done their work with this car. The Baleno, it was starting to show its age. Its rivals like the Tata Altroz, the Hyundai i20 seemed a lot more fresh, and the older car had a really tough fight on its hands. But these updates makes that fight a lot easier. It's well priced as well. The starting price of the Baleno is rupees 6.35 lakhs. The top of the line manual, this very car, costs rupees 9 lakh rupees, and the AMT top of the line costs rupees 9.5 lakh rupees. And the strengths of the Baleno have always remained. It's extremely reliable. You've got Maruti's network and service. It's pretty quick and it's very comfortable. All of that combined make the Baleno a very good package, especially when you factor in everything that's gone on inside the cabin to keep it fresh. If you are looking for a car in the premium hatchback space, this should definitely be a car that's on your shortlist. Well, thank you for watching Evo India. I'm Atish Mishra signing off. Before you leave, don't forget to like this video if you liked it. Leave a comment down below. What do you think of the new Maruti Suzuki Baleno? Do you think Maruti has done enough to keep it fresh? And of course, as always, please do subscribe.